Welcome back, students, to the milestone 80th lesson of our masterclass. Today, we're officially transitioning from the granular mechanics of DRG grouping and zooming way out. We are diving into high-level financial analytics, case mix modeling, and the executive dashboards that actually drive decision-making in the C-suite.
And before we jump into the numbers, if you are enjoying this lesson, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel and share it with friends for this free course on Decode Healthcare with Harshal. It really helps us out.
Okay, here's our agenda for today. We'll start with a quick DRG and documentation recap, dive into the mathematical foundations of Case Mix Index, explore financial impact modeling, look at executive RCM dashboards, and finally, wrap things up with a summary. Let's get right into it with Section 1, DRG and Documentation Recap, focusing on the micro level. So there's a really delicate balancing act when it comes to documentation integrity. On one hand, we've got upcoding. This is when a coder selects a higher-weighted DRG that literally isn't supported by the clinical documentation. Doing this brings massive legal and audit risks, potentially triggering some brutal False Claims Act penalties. But on the flip side, we have undercoding, right? This happens when the codes assigned yield a lower reimbursement than what the patient's actual clinical documentation supports. Undercoding artificially lowers your hospital's acuity metrics and leads to massive hidden financial damage and a huge drop in your overall case mix index.
Let's put this into perspective with a real-life example to see exactly what undercoding costs. Imagine a patient is admitted for pneumonia due to Streptococcus pneumoniae. They undergo a bronchoscopy, and they also happen to have secondary diagnoses of COPD and hypertension. Now, if coded correctly, this groups to DRG 193, simple pneumonia with a complication or comorbidity, or CC. With a relative weight of 1.10, the expected reimbursement for this chart is exactly $8,500. But what if the coder just misses that COPD documentation? The DRG plummets to 195, simple pneumonia without CC. The payment drops to $6,200. You guys, missing that single secondary diagnosis just cost the facility $2,300 in lost revenue. For one patient.
All right, moving to Section 2, CMI Mathematical Foundations. Now we're zooming out from the individual patient chart.
We're looking at the ultimate healthcare executive metric, the Case Mix Index, or CMI. The core formula here is actually pretty straightforward. CMI equals the sum of all MSDRG relative weights for discharges in a given period divided by your total number of inpatient discharges. Basically, CMI is the true reflection of your patient population's overall clinical complexity, their resource intensity, and your hospital's general acuity. But keep in mind, CMI trends are heavily influenced by a bunch of variables. You always have to normalize your CMI to understand, hey, is this jump due to a true acuity shift, like maybe we just opened a brand new CAVR or organ transplant program, or is it just because of service line volume shifts or better documentation capture? And CMI absolutely does not exist in a vacuum. It takes a village. It requires perfect synergy among three key stakeholders. First, your clinical teams. They provide the foundational documentation, because the DRG can only be based on what the physician actually writes down. Second, the coding teams, who translate that documentation into accurate DRG assignments. And third, your clinical documentation improvement, or CDI teams. They are the ones protecting your revenue integrity by querying physicians concurrently when clinical indicators, like a suspiciously high lab value, lack a corresponding severity diagnosis. That brings us to Section 3, Financial Impact and Trend Modeling. Here's the absolute core calculation formula that every C-suite executive memorizes. Hospital payment equals the base rate multiplied by the DRG relative weight. Let's say CMS has defined your hospital's base rate at $6,000. If you capture a DRG like heart failure with a major complication or comorbidity, an MCC, the relative weight might be around 1.3. 6,000 times 1.3 gives you a payment of $7,800. Capturing that severity directly dictates the dollar amount. Executive teams use financial sensitivity analysis to track this at massive scale. To find the revenue impact of even a tiny 0.01 shift in your CMI, you multiply that CMI delta by your total annual inpatient discharges and then multiply that by your hospital's adjusted base rate. It's also super important to analyze separate baseline trends for medical DRG CMI versus surgical DRG CMI. Doing that split helps executives identify where the uncaptured clinical documentation opportunities are hiding.
And listen, timing is literally everything in documentation, specifically regarding present on admission or POA indicators. Take a look at this chart. If a condition develops after admission, let's say the patient gets a deep vein thrombosis, it's classified as a hospital-acquired condition. So even though a DVT is normally a major complication that would boost your DRG tier, if it's not present on admission, the payer only pays the base DRG. Plus, the hospital gets slapped with a quality review and a non-payment penalty. No revenue boost, just penalties.
Okay, Section 4, Executive RCM Dashboard KPIs. Let's look at how the big bosses track all this.
A truly actionable executive dashboard for a CFO or revenue cycle VP relies on hard, undeniable data points. We're talking about essential KPIs like the first pass clean claim rate, which tracks how many claims go out without errors. Then there's days in AR, measuring the average time from discharge to getting paid. We also heavily monitor the denial rate and the physician query response rate. These dashboards will also track discharge not final billed, or DNFB dollars, basically unbilled DRG hold days. They'll scrutinize CC and MCC capture rates across high-volume categories like respiratory or cardiovascular. And they definitely track the geometric mean length of stay efficiency ratio, which is just your actual length of stay divided by the GMLOS target.
As you can see on this matrix, every single KPI maps directly to a specific revenue cycle purpose. Tracking your denial rate helps pinpoint exact coding issues, while days in AR takes the pulse on your overall efficiency. By obsessively tracking these metrics, hospitals can benchmark their internal CMI trends against national CMS hospital peer groups, regional health systems, and academic medical centers. It tells them exactly where they stand in the market.
Because the downstream impact of poor documentation, it's like a massive domino effect. It goes way beyond just DRG assignment and underpayment. Missing CCs and MCCs damages your quality metrics. Insufficient clinical justification leads straight to payer denials. Unsupported coding triggers audit risks. And ultimately, poor documentation completely damages your public reporting. It negatively impacts your reported mortality rates, readmission rates, and your hospital's public case mix index. It affects the whole shebang.
Which brings us to our final section, summary and teaser.
To wrap up our analytical journey today, here are your core takeaways. Accurate documentation is the foundation that feeds the DRG grouper. That DRG assignment mathematically dictates your case mix index, reflecting your true clinical complexity. Financial sensitivity relies almost entirely on accurate CC and MCC capture. And finally, those executive dashboards are what monitor your RCM health, ensuring your KPIs stay in the green and your hospital remains financially viable.
I want to leave you with a provocative thought. We saw earlier that missing just one secondary diagnosis, like COPD, cost a facility $2,300 on a single chart. When you scale that up across tens of thousands of annual discharges, how many millions of dollars are hiding in your hospital's unwritten documentation right now?
Something to think about. Next time, in Part 81, we'll dive into an advanced medical DRG deep dive focusing on major diagnostic category 05, the cardiovascular system. If you are enjoying this lesson, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And share it with friends for this free course on Decode Healthcare with Harshal. I'll see you in the next lesson.